All right, everybody, we are back again for another episode of the Coach's Compass. Don't know what episode we're on because, again, we can just continue to roll and bring on special guests each and every week. And always remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below so we continue to grow this thing and continue to take this in the right direction and continue to help people see where they need to go in this coaching world. But like I said, we got an important guest with us today, somebody that is based on nutrition. A huge factor that goes into play with your performance. We got our boy Jay out of the UK, but originally from Germany, right? Goes by Jorn, but also goes by Jay. Everybody knows him as Jay in the UK. Certified sports nutritionist, works with a whole bunch of different athletes, mainly working with, I wouldn't say just all athletes. You know what I mean? Here helping elite athletes know and understand what nutrition helps them do. Who runs Athlete, which is a super cool name. And when I was reading it, I was like, man, that's creative. Also, it runs his own podcast called Athlete Radio. So, Jay, welcome and thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I love being here and looking forward to our discussion about nutrition.
So, man, why nutrition? Like, why did you choose that route?
It's actually it's quite interesting because I would say, as I was growing up as a teen athlete, so I was always playing sport myself, and originally the goal was to become a strength and conditioning coach, believe it or not. And it was in my early 20s when I had a severe lower back injury, and that kind of put me in a place where I wasn't sure if I'd be healthy enough to do what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like that was my worst fear, that, I wouldn't be able to demonstrate and, perform exercises and show them to my athlete. So then I was thinking, okay, I still want to work with athletes. What other routes are available to work with elite athletes? And I've always been interested in nutrition. So that was sort of my natural second choice after not being able to become a strength and conditioning coach. Right after high school, I basically started my journey and studied nutritional sciences, always with the intention to specialize on sports nutrition. And that's basically what I did. So I have 2 other degrees in sports nutrition, and I've been working as a nutrition coach for 7+ years now.
So how hard is it to get like athletes to understand how important nutrition is to playing a role in their performance?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, I guess the easiest way to answer that question is that food is fuel, right? So if you're not eating enough, if you're not eating right, you're obviously not providing your body with sufficient energy. And if you don't feel energized doing practice or doing a game or a match, you can't perform at your best, right? So that's as simple as it gets. And then obviously you've got the recovery aspect where nutrition plays a huge role. It has an impact on, your hydration. It has an impact on your energy stores, the glycogen stores, where we, utilize carbohydrates, which is the most efficient fuel source for exercising at high intensities. And then we obviously have muscle recovery. We have the recovery of central nervous system. And on each of these aspects, nutrition has a big impact. So it's not just one area of recovery. It is many areas of recovery that nutrition plays a huge role. So, I mean, and I guess lastly, I always like to add the fact that, once you've gotten to a certain level of competition, once your competitors, they're all genetically gifted, they are all working their asses off in the gym, then, nutrition, what you're doing outside the gym can, give you the competitive edge over your competitors, because they, may not be optimizing their nutrition game. They may not be optimizing their sleep and, their mental game. And that obviously plays a huge role in your overall performance as well.
So what is like one area you see, like common area that you see that athletes are lacking at in their nutrition and missing on?
I would say if I have to pick one, I mean, there's obviously many, and it can vary from sport to sport and athlete to athlete. But if I had to pick one, it is probably periodizing your nutrition based on the sporting demands. And that's basically just a fancy way of saying you're not training the same way every day. And that means you shouldn't be eating the same thing and the same amounts every day. And then obviously the more you train, the higher intensity the training is. The same applies for the matches or the games as well. The more you need to eat. And I usually see the opposite happening, right? So if an athlete is, for example, has 2 practices a day, which can happen, the energy demands are crazy, especially for, male athletes with higher body mass. The energy requirements can easily surpass 4,000 calories. And then if you just look at it from a practical perspective, if they spend 4 hours a day in a gym or on a playing field, that means also 4 hours less available to prepare and eat food. But at the same time, they need more energy. They need to eat more. So it just contradicts itself. And that what usually happens is athletes undereat on these training days where the demands are really high, and then they compensate on the next day, on the rest day, or when they have only low intensity training session, and then they kind of like overeating on the next day, and then on the scale it kind of like evens out, and the athlete is probably thinking, well, I'm eating enough because I'm neither gaining nor losing weight, but what's happening is they're not fueling properly on the high demand training days. They're not recovering properly, they're not fueling properly, and they don't feel at their best at the next practice session.
That's tough for a lot of athletes that are playing. I mean, if you look at high school or you look at college and athletes that are playing a lot of sports, or maybe even the professional level, or guys that aren't professional that have, work in there and then have to go to practice and all that stuff. What are you giving as tools to these athletes to help them hit the amount of calories they're supposed to eat a day? And like, how many calories would you recommend for, like a high level athlete, male or female, to be for their intake for a day?
I mean, it's a quite complex question to answer on a general level, because the energy requirements can vary vastly between athletes, even if there's the same, body weight, because, genetics, how much they are moving in, outside of practice, are they using their bikes, what's quite common in Europe, I know not so common in the States, but it is common in Europe. Then even within the same sport, different positions, like let's say a running back versus linebacker, a receiver versus quarterback, they're all moving different amounts doing practice, doing matches. So I always recommend, having at some point work with a professional who can calculate pretty accurately what your energy demands look like. And then if you either you're not up to that, or you don't have the financial budget to work with a nutritionist or someone who knows that stuff, and the next best thing I would do is probably use like a smartwatch, but in combination with a heart rate chest strap. So, and then based on an accurate heart rate reading, the algorithms by Garmin and Polar and whatnot, they're pretty accurate right now. I wouldn't say it's gold standard, but it gives you, a target you can aim for. And then from a practical standpoint, what I usually recommend for athletes with just generally high energy requirements is, for example, using a lot of liquids. And by liquids, I mean shakes, juices, and stuff like that. You can also, for your recovery shake, even athletes like you and Jay, like, your big dudes, and a lot of American football players just consume a protein shake. Just add 60 to 80 grams of carbohydrate powder into that. It's what you need to refuel anyways. And that gives you, you don't have to eat an extra meal. It's just to change the composition of one meal. For example, when you're doing a healthy smoothie, let's say most athletes would just use, let's say, some frozen fruits, add some chia seeds, add some peanut butter, some healthy fats, but you're still drinking the same shake. So you don't, have to eat pasta and rice 5 times a day. Kind of trying to summarize it, I would say find ways to add healthy, energy-dense food. So 1 or 2 food groups that fall into that categories are like nuts and peanut butter and stuff like that. And then the other one is kind of like, native olive oil, so healthy seed oils. And then besides that, you kind of have to become a bit creative and find, personalized solutions, because everyone's day-to-day life looks a bit different. So For one athlete, it might be, as my job as nutritionist, researching shops available around the practice campus, what is available to eat and buy, so they don't have to prepare the food all the time. For other athletes, it might be recommending one recipe that they can easily meal prep. They can just throw a bunch of sweet potatoes, chicken, and vegetables in the oven, but huge amounts. It takes 15 minutes, and they have basically meal prep for 4 days in a row. Yeah, so there's not one size fits all solution, but sort of the idea is to find, I guess, individualized advice solutions to what's keeping the athlete away or hindering them from eating enough. And that, like I said, can be different from one person to the other.
I'm not sure. Are you familiar with like the American football like thing where it's like usually athletes will come in the off season after the season and they'll say this athlete needs to gain weight, this athlete needs to maintain, this athlete needs to like. What are your views and thoughts on that? Because sometimes like I feel like we usually never had dietitians. It's usually the strength coaches that are telling these athletes to do that, and sometimes I feel like there's no care taken or nothing taken in consideration. It's just like this athlete probably shouldn't be gaining this much weight. It's just like, so what are your thoughts on that gain, maintain, lose?
Yeah, very good question. I think it's a very common scenario within the sport of American football. So as a nutrition coach, I obviously have to be aware of cultural aspect of every sport, right? And that's a perfect example for that. I would say that it isn't my responsibility to kind of like tell the athlete to lose or to gain weight. If that's what the coach ultimately wants, that's the goal. From if the athlete wants to play on the pitch, and if that's what the coach tells the athlete is the requirement, so the athlete is able to do that, then I'm on board and supporting the athlete to get there on the easiest and best possible way. I think the biggest issue and challenge is how to get there. So if someone is just telling someone you need to gain weight or lose weight, and then they're not providing any assistance, they're not providing any guidance, then that's where I see the problems happening, because most of the athletes don't have the knowledge nor the tools to do it properly. Like it's not that complicated to lose weight, but to lose weight properly while maintaining a high level of performance, that's tricky. So let's start with the losing body fat part, and then we can switch it around and talk about gaining muscle mass. So losing body fat always requires a calorie deficit, so you need to eat less calories than you burn, basically, and that pushes the body, or it requires the body to use body fat as an energy store, because we're not having enough energy provided from the diet. When, as an athlete, we still need to make sure that they're fueled properly and they're eating enough to recover properly. So trying to keep it short, in a nutshell, that means you, as an elite athlete or high level competitive athlete, you should aim to eat relatively normal and large meals around your training to make sure you're properly fueled and providing the body all the nutrients for optimal recovery. Then the further you get away from practice or game or match, whatever it is, that's the time to cut back on calories. Whereas for general population, it doesn't really matter whether they, have a smaller breakfast, a smaller dinner. The timing doesn't really matter. It's a different story for athletes. So I always recommend, on high intensity training days, it's not a good idea to go on a low calorie diet. If you're training twice, you should probably actually be at maintenance calories, and then just, go back to a small calorie deficit on the next day, which goes back to what I said earlier, the periodized nutritional approach, matching the nutrition based on the training demands. Did that answer your question in a way that you think it can be understood by your audience? And then going to the other question, which was how to properly gain weight, I would say the key factor is a good monitoring goal, because especially within American football, athletes just try to eat as much as possible and they overdo it. So yes, they are gaining weight, but what does that due to the body composition of the athlete. They're usually just getting fatter and gaining very little lean mass, which is going to slow them down, slow down the acceleration, because power to weight ratio is going to go down. So if you look at scientific data that from athletes that have been lifting weight and playing sports for a longer period of time, we do know that the rate of gaining lean mass from a genetic standpoint is quite low. So you can't expect to gain 4 kilograms of muscle mass within a month. It's just not realistic for an advanced athlete. So what I tend to advise, if the goal is really to gain lean mass, muscle mass, is to aim for 0.5% of your body weight per week. So just a simple example. Let's say an athlete weighs 100 kilos. That would mean on average, they should aim to gain half a kilo per week. So 2 kilos in a month. I guess we can, I don't know how many of your listeners are more familiar with the American units and pounds. It's very similar. You can still apply the same principle. And then lastly, I would add that, when it comes to monitoring the weight or the body composition changes, I see a lot of mistakes. Like, it's either people weighing themselves at different times of the day. They're weighing themselves, like, let's say once or twice a week, and they get super, super nervous and anxious when they see a weight change of like 2 kilos from one day to the other. Whereas in reality, it's completely normal for body weight to fluctuate from between 1 or 2 kilos from one to the other day without, in reality, any changes of, muscle mass or fat mass having occurred. So that's just, have you been to the toilet the evening before? Have you sweat a lot during practice? That can have a big impact on body weight in total. So that's why I recommend at least 3 body weight measurements per week in the morning on a fasted stomach, and then take the average. So always, add all 3 measurements together, divided by 3, which gives you your weekly average body weight. And then you compare that to the average body weight of the next week. And then you can say, have I been gaining weight on average, or have I been losing weight or not? No weight change at all. And then I can, based on those numbers, I can do some adjustments. If I'm not gaining enough weight, I should eat more calories. If I've been gaining too much weight, more than 0.5% of your body weight, then you should adjust to eat fewer calories. And then you could take it to the next level and measure waist circumference as well, which is a good indicator for body fat level. So if there's no coach available to do like a high quality caliper measurement, or like a DEXA scan, which is kind of like the gold standard of body measurements, you can just use a measurement band and measure the waist circumference. And ideally, your body weight should go up while the waist circumference stays the same. So that kind of gives us the feedback that we're not gaining body fat, but we are gaining weight overall. And then the likelihood that this weight gain is coming from extra muscle mass is very high.
Could you tell us, could you give us, I'll say probably like a top 5 supplements that athletes should implement into their everyday life?
Sure. So I would like to start with this, with saying that, supplements, like if you look at a hierarchy of needs of athletes, supplements are kind of like at the very top. It's like, it's not super important. You see Olympic athletes winning gold medals without taking any supplements. It's mainly coming from their fear of taking something contaminated with prohibited substances. So some just don't take supplements and they still, beat their competition. But there are, a handful of supplements that are backed up by good scientific data, and they can improve performance. I would say on average within the range of 1 to 2%, which at a certain level can definitely give you, a competitive edge. Besides kind of like the more, let's say, functional supplements, let's say protein powder, carbohydrate gels, and sport drinks, these, definitely have, are backed up by science, and their main benefit is just the convenience of having the right macronutrients available right after practice. So if you prefer to have like chicken, beef, or even like a vegan protein source, tofu or whatnot after practice, and you don't like shakes, that's fine. But you have to have a protein source after high intensity practice, right? So if you prefer one or the other, it's fine, but make sure you have protein and carbs after every session. The same with sport drinks. It's just easy on the digestive system, and it gives you, for longer high intensity sessions, it gives you electrolytes and carbohydrates together with fluids. So yes, you could mix your own sport drinks. So I do that with some athletes, but you would have to go with a lower sodium electrolyte concentration. Otherwise, they taste not really well. So yeah, those are backed up by science. But besides those, creatine has been studied for centuries, decades, not centuries. It's plenty of research showing that creatine is beneficial for strength training and speed training and interval training. So I would say, and based on my experience, every strength athlete is usually taking creatine, but a lot of, like, let's say, track and field athletes, hockey athletes, swimmers that are doing the sprint disciplines, those are often not taking creatine, and they are missing out because they are still, using the same energy system with the creatine phosphate energy system, and creatine basically restores ATP, the universal energy molecule in our body, really, really quickly and efficiently. Yes, do take creatine. If generally you're open to take supplements, just make sure that, and I know we have spoken before we hit the record button, we've talked about the chance of taking supplements contaminated with prohibited substances. And that's definitely a thing. So in Europe, on average, 10 to 15% of supplements are contaminated with prohibited substances and can result in a positive doping, case. So make sure you're taking a supplement that is tested by a third party. In Europe, there's usually Informed Sport, or We Trust. We Trust You Perform, I think it's called now, the website. They changed the website, and the German equivalent is Kölner Liste. So make sure it's got that testing done. Then caffeine is a big one. Caffeine, especially in endurance sport, not so much in strength sport. So there is a small benefit when you're doing strength work, but the biggest impact it has when you're doing prolonged exercise, or exercise for prolonged duration. It doesn't have to be an Ironman, but let's say you have a football camp in preseason which lasts for 3 hours plus. Take some caffeine. The only thing I would add is it takes a really long time to metabolize and break caffeine down and get it out of the system. And we do know that caffeine does have a negative effect on sleep quality. So if your practice is in the evening, you might have to balance one thing against the other. It is probably not worth taking caffeine if you can't go to bed and fall asleep afterwards, because you're losing out on other aspects of recovery you get from sleep. One thing I guess is important: caffeine can be consumed in form of coffee. I know there's a lot of coffee lovers, especially in Europe. It does have the same effect, so you can have a coffee. The only thing that people often don't know or neglect is that the amount of caffeine that can be found in one cup of coffee can vary, like, really greatly. Like, on average, it's 100 milligrams of caffeine, but there are studies that one cup of coffee can contain between 25 milligrams up to 200 milligrams. And you don't know what you're getting. It's based on where the coffee beans are grown, how they're prepared, and I don't know. I'm not into the process of coffee making, but that all has an impact on the caffeine impact. So if you want to keep it consistent with the dosage, I recommend taking a caffeine pill. Other supplements that are proven to be effective are beta-alanine and sodium bicarbonate, and they work very similar in terms of how they have a positive impact on the energy systems during high intensity. When you have, let's say, interval training, repetitive sprint training, stuff like that, 400-meter runs, multiple 100-meter runs, whatnot. We have athletes often say it's lactate what's building up and decreasing performance. In reality, it's a different substance. It's hydrogen ions that are building up in the muscle, and they have a negative effect on the carbohydrate metabolism. And these two supplements basically, they are buffer agents, meaning they kind of push the acidic hydrogen ions outside of the muscle cell, and that kind of makes the muscle fatigue later. So you basically can maintain a high intensity for a longer period of time. The only difference really between sodium bicarbonate and beta-alanine, there's two big differences between them. Beta-alanine you have to take on a daily basis for at least 6 weeks. So that's one mistake that athletes do. They oftentimes take it as part of their pre-workout routine, but then they only work out 3 to 4 times a week. But in order for beta-alanine to be really effective, you need to take it 7 days a week for at least 6 weeks, which also makes it a pretty expensive supplement if you think of it. So because you have to take it for a very long time to see the benefits. And sodium bicarbonate is kind of the opposite. Like you can take one dosage and have the benefits of the supplement. In many athletes, it causes digestive issues. So the side effects are a lot higher. So if I recommend, and sodium bicarbonate is super cheap. You can actually buy it in a supermarket because it's baking powder. That's what it is. And I don't know, I guess no one has, or very few athletes have, consumed baking powder, but you can imagine it tastes horrible. So you have to mix it with some juice and stuff. And then you have to split up the required dosage into 4 smaller dosages a day to kind of reduce the likelihood of, digestive issues. So I would recommend taking sodium bicarbonate usually together with a trained nutrition coach to, make sure that don't take it right before the most important match of your season, because that's kind of like the worst case scenario, you having to go to the toilet and not being able to play. But if you make sure that you test it in training and you make sure you tolerate it well, there are big benefits to that. It's definitely an underestimated supplement. I guess the last 2 supplements from a performance standpoint that kind of fall in the nice to have category that do have some decent data to back its benefits up is beetroot juice, which, keeping it short, basically has a positive effect on blood flow and energy supply to the muscles. And then we have citrulline, L-citrulline, which is an amino acid, and it actually works very similar to beetroot juice. So these kind of are the most effective supplements in a nutshell. For many athletes, it's important, I will recommend it, to take vitamin D as well, especially if you an athlete who plays winter sports or indoor sports, or you have dark skin color, which has a negative effect on vitamin D synthesis. We can naturally produce vitamin D when we're exposed to the sun, but because of the darker skin color of athletes, that reduces the effectiveness of vitamin D synthesis. And then, they're depending on the athlete and, potentially some blood work. You could take some omega-3 or iron if you're a vegan athlete, but these are kind of like, I would say, I wouldn't generally recommend taking these supplements. It's more after a thorough assessment of, what the athlete is eating. The current biomarkers are telling us how there's, if they're getting enough of everything.
Man, that's all super interesting and definitely super important to take into account. And I know, there's so much more that we can dive into, but I know we all got super crazy schedules, and we're going to have to schedule another one because there's so much more that we need to dive into and get into. And we're going to save the 90-second round for the second interview that we have with you, Jay, because I know we gotta get to some other things, and the schedules are a little tight right here. So we're going to schedule another one. So stay tuned for more with Jay as he comes on and talks even more about nutrition. And if you have any questions, reach out to Athlete. He's doing a lot of great work. Check out his podcast, Athlete Radio. And Jay, we thank you for coming on today.
Of course. Thank you for having me, mate. Pleasure to be here, and would love to have another recording with you.